Welcome to the Private Practice Pro podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping therapists cultivate success. Here's your host, Kelley Stevens.
All right. Hi, Megan. Welcome to the Private Practice Pro podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. All right. We're already laughing, which is a good sign. So I've been on your podcast before, and so I cannot wait to kind of get into all things therapy, private practice, mental health career. And I thought, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are, what you do, what your business is about, all of that.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me. It feels like it's been a while since we actually got face to face, so this is exciting. Yes, my name is Megan Kelley. I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Indiana, USA. And I own and operate my own telehealth practice from my home. And it is a self-pay practice that I started in late 2021. I'm also I don't really know how to say it. Like I operate the anti-therapist. The founder. I am the founder of the Anti-Work Therapist Instagram page, as well as the Anti-Work Love Letters, which is on Substack. It is a place where I write about basically demystifying the wild world of being in mental health as a professional. And I have on there as well a specific section that is for newer therapists, so people who are in grad school, kind of through the first several years of their practice, where I give support and advice and feedback about basically how to survive the early years, because it can be really hard. Additionally, of course, because we don't stop there, I do have a podcast of my own, which Kelley mentioned. It's called the Mental Status Podcast. It is about burnout in the mental health field, and it is interview style where I have guests like Kelley come on and talk about their own personal journey with burnout in the mental health field. So kind of letting people talk about their experiences and also talking about ways to overcome burnout and do the work that we love. So I think that's most of the current stuff within the past few years. Yes.
Well, it's so funny. So we met through Instagram. I feel like we're Instagram friends, which I always felt like my parents told me never to make friends on the internet. And then all of a sudden, like half of my friends have come from the internet. Yeah. Which is great. I mean, I think it's been a really nice thing. And I mean, just to give you a plug for your content, there's so many times when I'm laying in bed and after a long day and I open up one of your posts and I feel like you're just talking to me. I feel like you talk in such a way that's like so real, so honest, and so detailed about what burnout is, the realities of being a therapist. And I think a lot of times there's things that we feel like we can't talk about as therapists, which you really do a good job of bringing up. And then all of a sudden I'll read the comments on your post and it's like, me too. Fun down someone else in your comments section. But so, okay, I want to go back to the beginning, because a lot of people listening to this podcast are building businesses of their own, trying to kind of navigate what it means to be really like a modern therapist. And, I think we think of therapists as sitting in their little offices, I don't know, smoking a cigar on a velvet couch. I don't know. That's not what, whatever you think of. And so maybe let's talk first about where you were before you started your private practice and what kind of motivated you to make the transition.
Yeah. I mean, so to have some transparency, what year is it? 2022. I am about 3 years into full-time clinical work. So I graduated in 2019. It took me about 2 years to get my independent license, which I got almost a year ago. It was October of 2021. So I've been independently licensed for less than a year.
Love it.
Love it. It's great. So where I started when I graduated, I graduated from a clinical mental health counseling program. It was a distance-based program, and I went immediately into working for a nonprofit where I was doing multi-systemic therapy. a really basic way of describing that is working with family systems to prevent their kiddos from being removed from the home because of troubling behaviors, anything from skipping school all the way up to gang involvement. So there was a lot of really intense work that I did in that first year. Really great experience, but I started to burn out, and it was noted to me that I was burning out within the first 6 months by my supervisor, thankfully. So
Wow. That's amazing that your supervisor brought it up.
yes, yeah, I was really glad. It kind of took me by surprise, but I think like showing up for a morning supervision meeting with like a rock star in one hand and then my coffee cup in the other and like serious dark circles under my eyes, he was like, yo, let's talk. So I was there for about a year. And then in 2020, I moved from Minneapolis to rural Indiana to be closer to my then fiance, now husband. He lives in Indiana, and we decided we wanted to close the gap. So very fortunately, I was able to transfer my supervised hours to Indiana. It would have been, yeah. Can I swear on this podcast?
100% you can swear on this
Okay.
podcast. Are we
I would have been
a disclaimer for that? I don't know.
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't fucking know. I would have been a shit show personally if I was not allowed to transfer those hours.
Oh, yeah.
So thankfully, it worked out in my favor, and I'm really grateful for that. When I got here, after about a month and a half, I joined another nonprofit doing really similar in-home work. And I left that job after 3 months because it was so intense and I burned out so quickly. I was leaving home at 8 a.m. and getting home around 8 o'clock at night for maybe 5 days a week. So it was not great. At that point, I was invited to join a group practice, still, independently, or not independently licensed, associate level licensed. So I was still under supervision. And it was a really nice shift to the type of work that I wanted to be doing. So that aspect was really nice, but I was really, really freaking stressed out about finances because the pay I was receiving was not great. And there was no protection for cancellations. There was no protection for no-shows. I was paid a flat rate per session. And as an independent contractor, as you know, you have to cut off a significant chunk from the top for taxes, and then you take out money for operating expense, all of that stuff. So at the end of the day, I was taking home anywhere from $15 to $20 an hour after everything. So really stressed. It was in the middle of that experience in July that I started the Mental Status podcast because I just needed to talk about being burned out.
Right.
And I needed like that avenue to be able to talk about things.
And you were still at the group practice when you started the podcast?
Yes.
Were they okay with you starting a podcast?
They did. They were not aware of it. And I didn't the thing that I've been really conscientious about is I don't intend to drag anybody through the mud.
Totally.
So a big part of that was not associating myself with any particular place, but more of this is me as a professional
100%.
voicing opinions. Yeah. So I remained at that group practice until I think it was November is when I actually left. But I started my own practice and started seeing clients basically right as soon as I got licensed, as I'd already had the business set up.
Right.
I'd worked with another supervisor to get it going. And as soon as I got my license, it's let's go. I'm not wasting any time. And it kind of rolled from there. And it's been a little over a year since I opened that practice. And it's been absolutely wild, but for the most part, very worth it.
Was there any part of you, it's pretty amazing that as soon as you got licensed, you made that jump. Was there any part of you that hesitated, or were you just feeling ready? Or how did you, a lot of times people spend years in that place,
I think there was a little bit of hesitation, but not much. And I think for me, by the time I decided to, get the articles of organization, I was building those blocks to be able to start things off. I was in such a place of disillusionment about working within particularly within the agency, nonprofit type settings. But I also had some experiences in the group practice that, while they were really helpful in getting me to understand what it feels like to be in that setting, I didn't necessarily agree with all the decisions that the owner was making. And so to kind of stave off some of my own self-doubt, I hired my own supervisor out of pocket to help me with the clinical aspect and help me with some of the business aspect. And I think that was around the time that I really started engaging with the online therapy world, reaching out and taking courses from, say, the Abundance Party, Allison Perrier, and getting some of your content as well. I was like, oh, this is good. Yeah. And that really helped me with my confidence, was seeing like, oh, I can build supports and I can do this.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think about, I was thinking back on what you said about we don't want to name any specific things. I think that's so important because I see often, I know I was in a group practice for actually almost 4 years before I opened my own practice. And I saw, and I've seen with many of my friends, this kind of like, we can get really disillusioned with the groups that we're in. And sometimes I think that disillusionment keeps us stuck because we keep blaming rather than saying, okay, I'm going to take these steps to have my own practice. And the fact that you went out and you hired an outside supervisor, you took some courses, really speaks to the fact that you realized like it was on you in a way,
Yeah. And that's been a huge thing for me that I feel like over time I've gotten better at recognizing maybe than I was. I've gotten better since I've, grown in this career. And I like to emphasize this with most of the people that I work with, obviously being sensitive to their unique situation, but really emphasizing within your career having choice and being able to say, I choose to do this or I choose to do that. Because a lot of the time I hear people say things like, I have to do this. I don't have any choice. I have no choice but to X, Y, and Z. And while it's important to remember, like, there are circumstances where maybe you can't jump ship right away, and that's fine. However, you can start building really slowly toward the thing that you want to do and take some agency there, rather than, like feeling stuck. I have to do this. I have no time. Whenever I find myself in that state and feeling stuck, that is a really good signal for me to be like, okay, something's not working. I need to reel it in a little bit and think about what I can actually control here.
So once you opened your practice, what was kind of your balance between content creation, making a podcast, seeing clients?
Yeah.
Probably asking the question I know the answer to, but how did you do that? How did you make it work?
I have no fucking idea.
Either. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's kind of the same thing. Like, so my grad school experience, I was working full time while in grad school up until the point that I had to do internship, and then I had to cut down on hours. And that whole time during grad school, I was like, I'm sure I'm going to look back on these days and say, I have no idea how I did it. It has felt much of the same in starting a business and kind of leaning into the creative projects. Parts of it have felt very by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And I won't say that I've had full missteps, but there's been stuff that I've started and subsequently had to say, this actually isn't really, I was really excited about this, but now I'm just like, I can't. So I had a membership space that I started and then closed. I had actually a full-on business with 2 other colleagues. We did some stuff. We realized after we formed the business that this actually isn't what we wanted. So we had to dissolve the business within 4 months of creating it. So it's like, it's been a very learn as you go type of experience for me, which has overall been pretty positive, but there's been some changes that have needed to be made as well.
I mean, look, I get it. Right before we were on this podcast, before we pushed record, my microphone didn't work, my camera didn't work, we couldn't hear. I mean, like, I feel like so many of us are trying to figure out how to do things outside of the therapy room, in addition to having clients. But like, and one thing I feel like I really admire about you is as we've become friends over the last year, watching you have your practice and try different things. I mean, I think that what you're saying of like, you try something and it can feel like, ooh, I need a course correction here, you know? But those things are good. I mean, they teach us a lot, and you're putting yourself out there. Whereas I will see, therapists spend 2 or 3 years thinking about what kind of podcast they want to do and never sitting down and figuring out how to hit record,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that balance is tricky. I mean, especially, so the one thing I hear a lot, and I'm wondering what you would say to this, is I'll hear therapists saying, okay, I have this practice set up, right? I have clients and I want to start a podcast or I want to open an online course, but it's not going to pay me right away. Because if we see a client, we're getting paid, obviously, like the next, whatever that day or the next day. And with a podcast or any sort of online platform, we're not. So what would you say to that mental barrier?
Yeah. I would say if that is the main barrier and you need to be paid for every hour that you work, you have a couple options. You could increase the fee for services so that you can accommodate for podcasting time, which in certain circumstances, you could list that as marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you structuring your fees in your practice to accommodate for those non-billable hours that you would, if you don't have the time filled with writing notes, for example, you could spend that time on the marketing efforts, if that's how you choose to market. I would say the same thing if you want to write a blog or if you want to advertise on social media. Those things are not going to give you an immediate return. I've been working on this podcast and kind of building up the brands that I have for almost a year. Yeah. And it is just now at this point that for me personally, it is starting to show actual monetary returns.
Right.
So it's okay to feel hesitant if you're not going to get paid right away. Parts of those creative projects, they are going to involve some longer term thinking and longer term strategizing. Same thing with SEO for your website. That will not pay right away, but over time, amazing return on investment.
Amazing.
So taking a longer term view of your practice and what you want it to look like is going to include both the short term, immediate return on investment, as well as the longer term things that you need to do.
Definitely. I mean, I think that that's so true. And like, I was so focused on listening to what you said. I don't know what I lost my own train of thought because I was like, preach.
Yes. It's funny because there's actually literally a train in the background here.
Well, that's good. We could like take a pause.
Yes. Get there.
Like enjoy the train. Reminds me, I'm so ADHD. This like reminds me of when I used to live by a train and like I would time when I went to sleep by the train. And anyway, all the things that you don't need to know. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what were the biggest hurdles in those first few months of just purely seeing clients? Like, how did you get clients? Were you afraid to go out on your own? Like, what was the biggest challenge that first year?
Yeah. I'd say because my practice is self-pay, there's an obvious hurdle there, at least initially, in kind of differentiating yourself from insurance providers and finding the specific areas where you shine. And I hear a lot of therapists get really caught up on this, like, well, I don't have a niche. It's like, that's ultimately, it's okay. There are successful self-pay clinicians who do not have a very specific niche. It's more about differentiating yourself as a provider and how do you show up and what's the feeling that people get when they read your marketing materials or interact with you. So for me, like that was one of the earlier hurdles, I guess, was for me figuring out my niche, which is burnout for mental health professionals. But I went through a few iterations of that and really had to figure that out. Getting clients. So what I did is I joined a local Facebook group, a private group for private practice clinicians in my region. And it's essentially a referral sharing network. It says like mid-20s client with
Right.
need for help with depression, who has availability. So I really started putting myself out there and just, again, I feel like the term is like negative these days, but it's a little bit of a pick me situation. Like, oh, I'm available.
Right.
But just putting your name out there and allowing people to see that you exist. Networking with people is scary, but it doesn't have to be. You can invite people in your local area to a Zoom coffee or actual coffee and just get to know them. You don't have to try to sell yourself. So that's a little bit of what I did. But honestly, the biggest hurdle was a lot of the mentality around, why am I not full yet? What's going on? What's happening? This is not going to work. And dealing with my own fear of just like the natural, typical progression of filling a practice, which again, for self-pay tends to be a little bit slower than some other insurance.
Definitely. And I like what you said about just letting people know that you exist. I think that that's so, it's something we don't think about. And a lot of times as therapists, we don't want to sell ourselves. But at the same time, like, there's plenty of wonderful therapists out there that I know that literally don't say anything to anyone about their practice. And then they're wondering why there's crickets, And I think it is a little bit of realizing that unless you put yourself out there, no one's going to find you. And those clients need help. They need you, And I think when we keep the focus, when we can tell ourselves, I'm doing this so I can help people, it makes it easier to quote unquote sell ourselves because we're putting ourselves out there for that reason,
Absolutely.
And definitely on Facebook groups. I think sometimes Facebook groups get a bad rap. A lot of us, like, there's all sorts of, if you're on Instagram, there's all sorts of like hate on Facebook groups. But the reality is they can be good referral sources. And I'll often tell people, like, you're looking for the gems. You're looking for people who are going to be a good long-term referral source for you. So maybe you'll put your name out there on one case and you'll start working with them or collaborating with them. And then it'll become a stronger referral relationship. It can turn into something that you didn't realize, or even like I'm thinking about you and me. Like we met through the internet. We met through Instagram, and now we've recorded a few podcasts and we talk to each other. I think like it's about using that as a starting place and then building a bigger relationship out of it.
Absolutely.
And like what you said about the mindset. Yeah, I think everyone I've worked with has that moment of like, isn't this supposed to be a little bit quicker?
Yeah.
And some people get lucky and it is quick, but there's a lot of like, wait, what's happening?
Yeah. Well, and actually for me, I think because I hit it pretty hard early on with the networking and putting myself out there. And another thing I should mention is having a really good website.
Yeah.
And really good online presence, just so people can know more about you before they reach out. I had, I guess I can call it, quote unquote, a good problem, because I filled my practice in about 3 months, which for me created a different type of issue, which is like, holy shit, I went from 0 to 100 and now I don't know what to do.
This is a theme in your life, Megan.
Kind of, yeah. Like things go really well and it's amazing, right? Like I'm especially grateful to those early clients and every client that I've had who has joined, but especially the earlier ones who, like, I was a newer private practice clinician and, whether they found me through Therapy Den, go Therapy Jeff.
Yeah.
Or
love Therapy Jeff. Everyone should follow Therapy Jeff.
He's so cool.
He's like the cool kid on the block, I think.
He is.
You're kind of the cool kid on the block too, though.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice. And Therapy Jeff was on my podcast. So it's like, we were chilling.
That's like celebrity status right there.
Yes. And yeah, all of that being said, whether you fill quickly or you fill slowly, like there will be mindset challenges that most people face in terms of getting that status and getting filled up essentially to the level that you want. And I think one of the biggest things that has been helpful is having a community of therapists. So I'm part of a coaching program. We meet every Wednesday. And it's a space where we can say like, oh my God, I'm really struggling with this right now. Like this particular situation happened and I'm over my head with just like frustration. What do I do? And having that is just like, it's really valuable, especially in the first year.
Oh, especially the whole time. I mean,
The whole time.
like so many consultation groups. I feel like I'm a consultation group junkie. Like I just love them. Okay, I want to ask you about one other topic and then we'll wrap up. So one question I get a lot of people asking about is private pay, right? Like accessibility. How do you wrap your mind around it? How do you feel like private pay works for you? So tell me your thoughts on private pay. That's not a very specific question, but how did it come to be that you decided to be private pay, and how do you wrap your brain around it?
Yeah. Well, for full transparency, and what I like to tell folks too is I actually contract a small number of hours per week with a different agency where I provide insurance-based services. So about 4, maximum 6 hours per week is insurance-based. I did that when I started primarily to increase my professional network, but also because, as with lots of us, accessibility is important to keep in mind. And it's one of the things that we work toward. So that's one way that I address that is you don't have to completely cut out insurance forever. But in my own practice that I own, I do have sliding scale spots that I opened up through OpenPath.
Yeah, I love OpenPath. Shout out to OpenPath.
Yeah, I mean, that's a directory that I used as a client for a very long time. It's like when I become a therapist, I'm using this.
100%.
Yeah. So I have a few slots through OpenPath dedicated on my caseload. And then with my full fee clients, I have a pay what you can scale. So it has a range. I have 3 different fee levels. The first fee is, this is really what helps me maintain my practice, cover all of my operating costs, which includes paying myself my own salary. And like, that's a fee that will just, it keeps me even keeled. I can keep things open. And then the 2 higher levels, the way that I explain it is, these are for folks who have greater accessibility to pay, kind of like, it's like a mini, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's like a mini, single payer system where people who are able to pay slightly higher and who elect to do so are supporting people at the lower fee. And every quarter, I dedicate 10% of my business profits to charitable giving. So there's an aspect of reinvesting some of those profits back into the community, making sure that the lower fee folks are supported, and I'm able to keep those spots open through clients who self-elect to pay at the higher levels. So my structure might be a little complicated. Maybe for some folks, it's like I've got 3 OpenPath slots and then everybody else is at a single fee. It really depends on what you think is going to line up best with your personal and professional ethics and how you want to offer those things.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is something I talk about all the time. And I love what you said. And I think there is no one way to do it. I think about the fact, like, none of us we're all kind of fighting against the way the system of mental health works, right? Like therapists and clients, ideally, we're functioning in the same system. And so unfortunately, insurance companies, government programs, tech companies, are not paying therapists what they need to. They're not providing appropriate coverage in a lot of cases. This is a huge generalization, right? Because we don't talk about specific platforms. But I love giving therapists ideas, and that's what you just did, about how you can create more accessibility in your practice while still taking care of your financial needs and not burning out. Because financial wellness is a huge, important part of mental health. We can't have careers for the next 40 years, 50, or however old we're going to be when we're doing therapy in our 80s or whatever, without talking about accessibility, but also talking about financial abundance and success for ourselves. I mean, the reality is people will leave the field if they're not able to pay their mortgage or they're not able to put their kids through college, and we want good providers being therapists, and it's challenging because there's not always one way to do it.
Yeah. And another aspect of that too is, who's kept out at the forefront from even wanting to pursue this field? People who could be amazing therapists who look at the stats and they're like, I just can't swing that. I can't put my family through me getting a salary of $40,000 a year. It's just not happening. So,
my very first week in grad school, a professor told me, you're going to make $40,000 a year. Meanwhile, the school I was going to, the tuition was like 50 something thousand a year at that point. It's much more than that now. And I was like, excuse me.
And pardon me, what?
And I really took a second and thought, should I even be here? Because I'm taking this huge financial risk, taking out all these student loans, and I could go and do something else right now, And I think about that all the time. It's like, we want the best mental health care. And right now, especially, there's a huge need for mental health. But our system hasn't caught up with how it all is working. And so therapists are creating these interesting hybrid systems. And I love the amount of thought and detail you've put into yours.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. It begs for some creativity. If you're the type of therapist who has decided, like, I really want to do this work and I cannot abide by making $40,000 a year, it is going to take some creativity until those other payer systems catch up, which is going to take a sea change, but I think it's possible. And I think it's possible when therapists and consumers do it together. Like, hey, we all need to talk about how this is not working.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And even in the last few years, I've seen, even in my own insurance, my own health insurance, it's gotten slightly better. Is it perfect? No. But there's a few more sessions and a few more providers and that sort of thing. So it has definitely gotten better. But all right, here's my last question for you. I want to know what you're most excited for in the future for your business.
It's a good question. I am excited for whatever opportunities come my way to make bigger impacts without me necessarily needing to overextend myself. There's been a variety of different things that I've thought through and how I could create bigger impact with therapist groups. So, the work that I do with anti-work therapists, the name is it's a bit off. It doesn't super accurately describe what I'm trying to do, because it's not that I'm like, I never want to work again. It's more, this work is so important that I want it to feel as good as possible and to meet as many needs as possible for as many therapists as possible. So the excitement is around, honestly, just seeing how that evolves. And as I'm sure you know, it's so freaking weird being on Instagram. I mean, this page is
so weird. Yeah.
And having these I feel, and I don't know, this, it sounds just so weird coming out of my mouth. And I realize that. But once you have the K after your followers, it's like something is different. People see you differently.
Weird. It's funny because I wonder if this has happened to you, but my family could care less about what I do as a therapist. They do not care. Friends, people ask me normal questions about work. And then as soon as I was on Instagram, they're like, oh, tell me about it. And I'm like, for 10 years you haven't, and which is totally fine. But yes, it's very odd.
Yeah. And I'll say to the people listening who maybe want to have that level of followers, it's fine to want that. It's, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not the best thing ever, though. It can be really cool to connect with lots of people and really cool to have those conversations. And it's not, it's just different, probably. It's different than what I expected, I suppose, of having a larger audience. Lots of good, a little bit of negative.
Yeah, we all got some trolls over here.
Oh my goodness.
I feel like I send you screenshots of my troll.
Yeah, it's sometimes like I've been lucky. Most of my followers are super awesome. Like they're chill, really open to like having more nuanced discussions, which is what I like. But yeah, I mean, I'd say overall the excitement lies within just seeing how that evolves and how that will just kind of change the way that like in either in my business or just overall how I approach advocacy work and promoting better work environments for therapists because we deserve it.
Oh, 100%. I think it's been a fun time to watch the mental health industry evolve. And I think in the social media realm, it's a fun time to watch therapists. I always think about it like therapists are dipping their toe into social media. I have people who will message me like, do you think it's too late to start a therapy Instagram? And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, what? DIY bloggers have been on since like the 80s, I mean,
Yeah.
therapy is just getting started in what you can do with your voice and your impact. And I love telling therapists, like, just put stuff, just start, So I agree with you. And I'm, as a fan of yours, I'm excited to continue watching all the things you create because I think it'll be really good. But do you have any last things you want to share with people? First of all, how do they find you? So I know you kind of said in the beginning, but give us your rundown of contact info and stuff.
Yeah. So the best ways to find me would be on Instagram. It's anti-work therapist on there. And I also have the Mental Status podcast. Mental status as in mental status exam, of course.
Such a good name.
So those are probably the two best ways to find me. If you are on Substack, it's kind of a cool up and coming like publication center, you can find me on there as the Anti-Work Love Letters. Again, that's where I publish more long form content about being in this field. And then there's the $7 per month paid subscription for early career therapists to get more information and just like support and basic stuff they didn't teach us in grad school.
Oh my goodness. We could have 3 more episodes about that topic.
Yeah. It's a whole podcast.
It's its own podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we are going to sign off. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll tune in next time.
It's awesome. Thanks.
This podcast is sponsored by Simple Practice. I've been using Simple Practice since 2016, which has helped me run a smooth and profitable private practice over the years. It has simplified everything from scheduling to billing, giving me a better balance between the work I'm so passionate about and the family time I'm not willing to miss out on. Check out the episode notes to get a free 2-month trial of Simple Practice, my preferred all-in-one HIPAA-compliant solution. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to one of my favorite segments, which is Ask Kelley Anything, where you can call in and ask your burning private practice questions. I will answer them live on this podcast. So if you want to submit a question to be answered, here's the voicemail. I'm going to read it right now, 805-243-8242, and call and ask me a question. And here we go. We're going to get into Lauren's question right now.
Hi, Kelley. My name is Lauren. I'm on my way to becoming an LPC. My goal is to have my own private practice. My original plan was to work in an agency for supervision hours and then continue to work there and use the loan repayment program so that I wouldn't have to pay back my own student loans, and they would pay back, I think, up to $50 grand on my student loans. So that means I'd be out 3 or 4 years until I have my own private practice. I have a 1-year-old baby girl and hope to have another one soon. I have a friend who's a private practice social worker, and she said that I would be happier and better off starting my own practice after supervision and then just paying back the student loans myself. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Thanks.
Wow. Okay. So this is a really tricky question, and actually one that I thought about too. So I'm going to kind of give some personal advice and experience to Lauren. And this is actually the first time I've listened to this message. So going to give you kind of my unfiltered thoughts. So when I graduated from my master's program, I had a similar amount of student loans. I had around 48,000 or something like that. And which I know that there are people out there who have a lot more than that. But that's what I graduated from my master's with. And there were loan reimbursement programs at the time when I graduated that would have paid me about $20,000 per year on top of a salary if I guaranteed a certain number of years working. So a lot of the ways that some of these loan reimbursement programs work is that you have to guarantee them a certain amount of time. And each year that you give them working at the nonprofit, they guarantee that they'll pay off a certain amount of your loans. Now, this purely, for me, when I thought about doing this comes down to math. And here's what it is. If the nonprofit guarantees X number of dollars per year, you have to look at if you were to work in another job that didn't provide loan reimbursement, are you going to make that amount of money in a salary? And that's really a question I can't answer for you. But I'll say, for me, when I first graduated from my master's, I looked at the base salary of what I would have made working in the nonprofit world, or continuing at one of the agencies I was working at when I was in school. And then I had to look at the base salary of a private practice. And for the private practice that I ended up working in during my hours, my salary was so much higher. And I worked so many less hours than I would have if I had continued on at the agency I was working at, that it was a no-brainer because the math just worked out that I would have earned more and been able to pay down on my student loans for working with a private practice. Now, I had friends who decided to do loan reimbursement because they felt like they would make more money doing it that way. So the first thing I would suggest that you do is that you really crunch the numbers and you look at what would your salary be in a private practice, what would your salary be working for this nonprofit, and then factor in that loan reimbursement, and then go from there. The next thing I would say is the other factor you want to look at, one, as a mom, is flexibility of your time, right? How beneficial to you is flexibility, number one, and how much are you going to pay in childcare would be the next one. So if working at an agency and getting loan reimbursement means that you're working further away or that you need more childcare, you also have to take those childcare expenses into account, right? If you work for a private practice and you can provide telehealth, that's really different than having to drive to an agency. That would be the next thing I would say. The last thing I would say is you also want to think about your long-term growth in your career. If your eventual goal is private practice and you know that like in 3 to 5 years after you did this loan reimbursement program, you really wanted to work in your own private practice, you have to look at what skipping out on those years to go work in the loan reimbursement situation is preventing you from doing. So if your eventual goal is private practice, then you're not just losing those initial years of building your practice. You're also losing like some of the momentum and some of those connections, which then make your later years easier. So the first few years of private practice, certainly if the math works out, then great. But even if the math doesn't work out, you kind of have to look at like, if you spend the next 4 years working in an agency, but your eventual goal is to build this big, robust network in private practice, then you're also losing some of that time building a reputation, building a network, making sure you're building your business and learning a lot. So all of that to say, there's a wide diversity of factors, and there's certainly not one right answer. But I think looking at the financial implications, looking at the childcare implications, and then looking at the long-term growth of your career is probably how I would do it. I wish I could give you a more concrete answer. This is a really complex question, and a question like all of us as professionals and as moms have to navigate. So I hope this helps. If you would like to be featured on Ask Kelley Anything, I love getting listener questions from you guys. Anything about private practice goes. And the best way to do that is actually just to give me a call and leave me a question on my voicemail. So I'm going to tell you the phone number right now and make sure to write it down. Here it is, 805-243-8241. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.